This blind dog walked 50 miles to find his owner. What happened next will bring you to tears. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel. Your subscription means everything to us and is the only way to ensure that stories of these incredible animals, who often remain silent, reach more people. It truly helps us continue our work. So please subscribe now. In the heart of a silent forest, the air crackled with uncertainty. Max, a golden retriever, stood alone, his world now cloaked in darkness. Just days ago, he was a happy dog, his eyes sparkling with life as he played fetch with George, a beloved war veteran. But fate took a cruel turn during their camping trip, tearing them apart in a tragic accident. George was lost, and in that moment, Max lost his vision. Surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of distant wildlife, Max felt the weight of isolation. Confusion gnawed at him, but the bond he shared with George ignited a spark of determination deep within. With nothing but his heightened senses and an unwavering love, Max set out into the unknown. He could smell the familiar scent of George lingering in the air, guiding him through thick underbrush and across rocky terrain. The journey ahead was fraught with peril, but the thought of reuniting with his owner pushed him forward. Every step was a battle against the elements. Over rivers that roared and under skies that threatened storms, Max pressed on. The world around him was wild and unforgiving, yet the memory of George's gentle voice resonated in his heart, urging him onward. How far was he willing to go for love? With each mile, Max proved that even in darkness, hope could light the way. Max stumbled through the dense underbrush, each step a testament to his unwavering resolve. The night air was crisp, filled with the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Despite his blindness, an instinctual guide propelled him forward, keeping him on the path he believed would lead him back to George. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the small town of Maplewood came into view. The townsfolk began their day, unaware of the extraordinary journey unfolding just beyond their borders. Shopkeepers, with their aprons dusted in flour, opened their doors, greeting the morning with warm smiles. But when Max emerged from the woods, his golden fur matted and his body weary, the atmosphere shifted. "Look, it's just a dog," a little girl named Lily exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think he's lost?" Her older brother, Jake, replied, squinting at the sight of the disheveled creature. Max paused, his ears perked up, catching snippets of their conversation. He couldn't see them, but their voices shattered the silence, offering a glimmer of hope that there were still humans nearby, possibly even George. As he approached the cobblestone path, a shopkeeper named Mr. Thompson stepped out, a basket of fresh bread in hand. He crouched down, concern etched across his weathered face. "Hey there, buddy. You look like you've had a rough time," he murmured, extending a piece of bread toward Max. But the dog only sniffed it before moving on, his stomach growling, yet his heart resolute. "Why won't he eat?" Lily whispered to Jake, who shrugged, his brow furrowing in thought. "Maybe he's waiting for someone," Jake suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if he's looking for his owner?" The townsfolk began to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of the lost dog. Each one had their theory. Some thought Max was searching for a family lost in the wilderness, while others speculated he was guarding a secret hidden deep in the forest. "What if he's protecting something?" An elderly woman chimed in, her eyes sparkling with intrigue. "He looks like he knows something we don't." Tension hung thick in the air, with every passerby casting curious glances toward Max. But the dog remained undeterred, his focus unwavering. The faint scent of George lingered like a whisper in the wind, guiding him forward. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher, casting shadows that danced around him. Max pressed on, navigating the cobblestones with a determination that captivated the crowd. Each step was a reminder of the love that spurred him onward, a force far greater than his physical limitations. Suddenly, a voice broke through the crowd. "Max!" It was George, his voice trembling with desperation. The townsfolk turned, eyes wide, as George pushed through the throng of onlookers, his heart racing with hope and fear. "Max!" he called again, panic lacing his tone as he scanned the area for any sign of his beloved dog. He had searched tirelessly, his heart heavy with worry, convinced that he might never see Max again. Max's ears perked up at the sound of that familiar voice. It was as if every fiber of his being ignited with recognition. He turned, and though he could not see, he felt the magnetic pull of George's love drawing him closer. In that moment, the world around them faded away. The crowd hushed, breaths held in anticipation, as Max took a hesitant step forward. "Max, is that really you?" George knelt down, his heart pounding. Tears welled in his eyes as he felt the warmth of Max's presence. The dog, guided by the sound of George's voice, surged forward. The distance between them evaporated in seconds, and as their bodies collided, joy and relief flooded the air. "Thank God! I thought I lost you," George sobbed, wrapping his arms around Max, who nuzzled into him, a whimper of pure love escaping his lips. The crowd erupted into applause, the emotional weight of the reunion palpable. "This is incredible," Lily exclaimed, her eyes glistening with tears. "He really walked all that way to find him." As George and Max embraced, the townsfolk began to murmur amongst themselves. "What a bond," Mr. Thompson whispered, wiping a tear from his eye. "I've never seen anything like it." The connection between man and dog transcended words, a bond forged in love and loyalty that had defied all odds. If this story is touching your heart, make sure to comment from where you are hearing this amazing story. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden rays around them, George lifted Max into his arms. Determination rekindled. "Come on, buddy, let's get you home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. With a renewed sense of purpose, they began their journey back through Maplewood, a testament to the power of love against all odds. The townsfolk watched, hearts swelling with admiration, witnessing a story that would be told for generations. A story of resilience, unwavering loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. Max may have been blind, but he could see love clearer than anyone. And as they walked home together, the world around them shimmered with hope, proving that even in the darkest times, love always finds a way. As George and Max made their way through Maplewood, the townsfolk watched with admiration, their hearts warmed by the touching reunion. However, just as the two were about to leave the crowd behind, a woman stepped forward, her expression a mixture of disbelief and shock. "George!" she called out, her voice filled with an urgency that pierced through the happy atmosphere. George turned, recognizing her instantly. It was Sarah, his estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years, their relationship strained by a misunderstanding that had morphed into resentment. He hadn't expected to see her here, especially not at this moment, filled with joy and relief. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cautious, filled with a mix of surprise and unease. "I came to check on you after hearing about the accident," Sarah replied, her eyes darting between George and Max. "I was worried. I didn't know if you were okay." Max, sensing the tension, instinctively stepped closer to George, as if to protect him. The dog could feel the shift in energy, the weight of unresolved emotions that hung in the air. "I'm fine, Sarah." "Max is fine," George replied, his tone firm but tinged with an underlying protectiveness. "We've been through a lot, but we're okay now." "But you don't understand," Sarah pressed, her voice rising slightly, desperation creeping in. "I was there when it happened. I saw everything." Confusion washed over George. "What do you mean? You were there?" "I was camping nearby," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "I heard the commotion, but when I got there, it was too late. I saw you both fall. I thought you were gone for good." George's heart raced as he processed her words. "You should have come to help," he exclaimed, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You left me and Max behind. I didn't know what to do." Sarah shot back, her voice cracking. "I panicked, George. I thought it would be safer to call for help instead of rushing in." The crowd around them was silent, witnessing the emotional confrontation unfold. "But you didn't call for help until hours later," George said, his voice low, filled with hurt. I thought I was alone in that wilderness, and so did Max. Max whimpered softly, sensing the emotional turmoil swirling around him. He nudged George's hand, grounding him in that moment. "Look, I'm sorry," Sarah said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I should have done more, but I've also been carrying the weight of this guilt for so long. I thought I lost you both that day." George stood frozen, the storm of emotions swirling within him. He had spent years harboring resentment, believing that Sarah had abandoned him in his time of need. But now, her anguish echoed his own. "Why didn't you reach out sooner?" he asked, his voice softer now, the fight slowly draining from him. "I would have understood. We could have faced this together." "I was scared," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought you would hate me forever. I never stopped caring about you, George. I just didn't know how to fix what was broken." The crowd remained still, allowing the siblings to confront their past without interruption. Max, feeling the tension ease slightly, took a step back, sensing that his role as protector was shifting. He laid down, watching as George's heart began to soften. "I can't keep holding on to this anger," George finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not healthy for either of us. But it hurts, Sarah. It really hurts." "I know," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "And I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to come to this." As they stood facing each other, the walls they had built over the years began to crumble. The pain of their past was still there, but perhaps it could be transformed into something new, an opportunity for healing. "Maybe we can start over," George suggested, his voice steady. "Maybe we can learn to be a family again. But it will take time." Sarah nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. "I'd like that. I really would." As they embraced, the crowd erupted in a wave of applause once again, witnessing not just the reunion of a man and his dog, but the rekindling of a family torn apart by misunderstanding. Max, sensing the warmth of the moment, stood up once more, wagging his tail, as if to say that love, in all its forms, is worth fighting for. In that moment, the bond between George and Max deepened, intertwining with the unexpected connection that was beginning to form between George and Sarah. It became clear that sometimes the path to healing requires facing not only the fears but also the relationships we take for granted. As they walked away from the crowd, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow around them. George felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that he wasn't just walking home with Max, but also stepping forward into a new chapter with Sarah. The journey that had begun in darkness was leading them all toward the light, proving that even the most fractured relationships could heal when faced with love and understanding. And as Max trotted alongside them, he was not just a blind dog who had walked 50 miles for his owner. He was a symbol of resilience, reminding them of the strength that lies within the bonds of family and the power of second chances. As George, Max, and Sarah walked away from the crowd, the air felt charged with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that mirrored the complexities of their past. Each step forward was a blend of hope and uncertainty, creating a delicate tension between them. But the relief of reunion was short-lived. As they approached the edge of town, a sudden rustling in the nearby bushes sent chills down their spines. Max's ears perked up, instinctively alert to the potential danger. He had endured too much to let his guard down now. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," George replied, his heart racing as he scanned the surroundings. The tranquility of the moment shattered like glass. Before they could process the sounds, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with a rugged appearance and eyes that glinted with malice. George's stomach dropped as he recognized him. It was Tom, a former acquaintance from the camping trip, someone who had always been troubled, prone to anger and aggression. "What are you doing here?" George demanded, stepping protectively in front of Max and Sarah. Tom smirked, his posture oozing menace. "I came to find you, George. You think you can just walk away from what happened? You left me behind in the woods when it got rough. Whatever happened back there doesn't matter anymore. Max and I survived, and we're going home." George replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. Survive? Tom laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the still air. You think it's that easy? You think you can just forget the truth? Max sensed the rising hostility, his instincts screaming that something was very wrong. He pressed closer to George, feeling the tension radiate off him. What truth? Sarah asked, her voice wavering. Tom stepped forward, invading their space, eyes fixed on Max. Your precious dog isn't the only one who's been through hell. I saw things you wouldn't believe. You should have listened to me that night. George felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. What do you mean? You didn't help us. You ran. Tom's expression hardened. I have my reasons. You think you know everything, George, but you don't even know what's lurking in the shadows. Max growled softly, sensing George's rising emotional state. Stop it, Sarah shouted, stepping in front of George and Max. Her voice was filled with unexpected strength. We're not afraid of you, Tom. You're the one who should be scared. Tom's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting. Scared? You don't know what fear is. You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming. With that, he backed away, disappearing into the trees, leaving behind an unsettling silence. What the hell was that? George breathed, trying to process the encounter. I don't know, but we need to get away from here, Sarah urged, glancing around nervously. Max barked, a warning that seemed to echo the urgency of the moment. They hurried down the path, hearts pounding, the weight of Tom's words hanging over them like a dark cloud. The sense of safety they had felt began to evaporate, replaced by a gnawing feeling of dread. As they reached the outskirts of Maplewood, the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Shadows elongated, creating a labyrinth of darkness around them. Should we call the police? Sarah suggested, her voice shaky. George shook his head. No, we can't. We need to get home first. I want to make sure Max is safe. Max walked closely beside George, his presence a comforting anchor in the growing storm of uncertainty. But with every step, he felt the tension in the air, the impending danger that lurked just beyond the trees. As they finally reached their home, George's body tensed. Something felt off. The front door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. Did you leave the door open? Sarah questioned, worry etching lines across her forehead. No, George replied, his voice low. I locked it before we left. Max instinctively stepped in front of George and Sarah, his protective instincts flaring. Stay close, George ordered, glancing at Sarah before stepping inside. The familiar scent of home was tainted by an unsettling stillness that hung in the air. Hello, he called, his voice echoing in the empty space. Silence answered back. As they entered the living room, the sight that greeted them sent a chill down their spines. The furniture was overturned, scattered belongings littered the floor, and the atmosphere felt heavy with an unspoken threat. Someone's been here, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. What do we do? George asked, panic rising within him. Let's check the rest of the house, she suggested, her voice steadier than she felt. Max remained vigilant, his senses heightened, guiding them through the chaos. They cautiously moved from room to room, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension that hung in the air. But as they reached the last room, the bathroom, a horrifying realization hit them. The window was wide open, the curtain fluttering eerily in the breeze. It's too quiet, George murmured. We need to leave now. Just as they turned to escape, a noise echoed from outside, a low growl that sent shivers down their spines. Max! George shouted, his heart racing as he realized the threat was closer than they thought. Max's growl deepened, teeth bared as he stood protectively in front of them. Suddenly, a shadow darted past the window. It was Tom, lurking just outside. George! Tom's voice taunted from the darkness. You can't run from your past, and you can't protect what's yours. George felt the blood drain from his face as he realized the danger wasn't just to him, but to Sarah and Max as well. We have to get out, Sarah urged, grabbing Max's collar. Hold on, George replied, his mind racing. We'll find a way to escape. Max stood resolute, his presence a steadfast reminder of the bond they shared. Together, they faced the encroaching darkness, knowing that they had to confront the fear and uncertainty that threatened to tear them apart. With every heartbeat, the stakes rose higher, and the mystery of Tom's intentions deepened. Would they escape the shadows that loomed, or would they find themselves ensnared in a web of danger they could hardly comprehend? As they stepped out into the night, a new chapter of their journey began, one filled with uncertainty, but also with the promise of discovery and resilience. Together, they would confront the darkness, for the bond they shared was powerful enough to face any challenge that lay ahead. As George, Max, and Sarah steadied themselves after the confrontation with Tom, they quickly retreated into the safety of their home. The door creaked ominously as they closed it behind them, sealing out the darkness that loomed outside. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, the remnants of their earlier joy now overshadowed by the fear that had crept into their hearts. "Do you think he'll come back?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she glanced nervously toward the window, half expecting Tom to reappear. "I don't know," George replied, running a hand through his hair, frustration and worry etched on his face. "But we can't let him intimidate us. We've faced too much together already." Max, ever the sentinel, stood at George's side, his body tense, ready to protect his family at all costs. As they appeared in the living room, George took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "We need to talk about what just happened. Tom's presence here isn't just a coincidence. He knows things we don't." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I mean that Tom was there that night. He saw everything," George said, his voice heavy with realization. "He might know more about the accident than we do. But why would he come back now?" Sarah questioned, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Maybe he feels guilty," George suggested, the anger in his voice fading to concern. "Or maybe he's looking for someone to blame." Just then, a low growl escaped from Max, cutting through the uncertainty like a knife. He turned his head toward the back of the house, ears perked up, alerting them to a sound that seemed out of place. "What is it, boy?" George asked, kneeling down to meet Max's gaze. But before he could get an answer, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, sending all three of them into a panic. George sprang to his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins. "Stay here," he commanded Sarah, his voice firm. "No, I'm coming with you," she insisted, determination shining in her eyes. Together, they rushed toward the kitchen, with Max leading the way, ears alert and senses heightened. As they entered the room, their hearts sank at the sight before them. The back door hung wide open, the remnants of shattered glass littering the floor, glinting in the dim light. "Someone broke in," Sarah gasped, her hands trembling as she took in the scene. "Max, stay close," George instructed, his protective instincts kicking in. Suddenly, from behind a chair, a figure emerged. A young girl, no older than 10, with wild hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. She looked frightened and lost, her wide eyes darting between George, Sarah, and Max. "Who are you?" George asked, confused and wary. I'm Emily," the girl stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted to find help." Emily's presence was unexpected and unnerving. "Help with what?" George pressed, trying to assess the situation. "There's something in the woods," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw it. It was big and dark. It's been following me." "Following you?" Sarah echoed, her heart racing. Emily nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was playing outside when I saw it. I ran, but then I heard it again. It's not safe." George exchanged glances with Sarah, his protective instincts flaring. "You shouldn't have been out alone. Where are your parents?" "They're at the town meeting," Emily replied, her voice shaky. "I was supposed to stay home, but I got scared. I thought I could find someone to help." Max, sensing the girl's distress, approached her with gentle curiosity. He nudged her hand, offering comfort in his own way. "Emily," George said, kneeling down to her level, "you're safe now. But we need to understand what you saw. Can you tell us more about this creature?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I don't know what it was. It was just watching me. I thought it was a dog at first, but then I saw its eyes. They were glowing. It wasn't a regular animal. I got so scared I ran away." As she spoke, a chill ran down George's spine. "Glowing eyes," he repeated, trying to piece together the mystery. "Yes," Emily confirmed, her voice trembling. "And it's been coming closer to the town. Some of the other kids saw it too. We thought it was just our imagination, but now I'm not so sure." George felt a knot form in his stomach. Tom's warning echoed in his mind. You can't run from your past. What if Tom had been right? What if there was something lurking in the darkness? A threat that was far more real than any of them had anticipated. "We need to warn the town," George said, standing up. "But first, we need to keep you safe, Emily." Just then, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the back door, making everyone jump. "Stay here," George commanded, rushing toward the sound, with Max following closely behind. As he stepped outside, the moonlight illuminated the yard, revealing the remnants of the shattered door. But what they saw next sent a wave of terror crashing over them. In the distance, a massive shadow moved, its form barely visible but unmistakably large. Glowing eyes pierced through the darkness, locking onto George and Max with an intensity that froze them in place. "Get back inside!" George shouted, his heart racing. Max growled fiercely, ready to defend his family against whatever threat was approaching. As they retreated back into the house, George slammed the door shut, adrenaline coursing through him. "What was that?" he gasped, panic rising in his chest. "I don't know, but we need to figure it out," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Emily, stay close to us," George instructed, his protective instincts kicking in once again. Max stood at the door, a sentinel ready to confront the unknown. As they huddled together, the weight of the night pressed down on them. The revelations about Tom and the mysterious creature lurking in the shadows forced them to confront their deepest fears and prejudices. What if the danger they faced was not just external, but also tied to their past? What if the haunting memories of their camping trip had summoned something dark? In that moment, they realized that their journey was far from over. They were embarking on a new adventure, a quest to uncover the truth behind the lurking shadows and protect their community from an unknown threat. With hearts racing and uncertainty swirling around them, they knew one thing for sure. Together, they would face whatever lay ahead, for the bonds they shared were strong enough to withstand the darkest of nights. As the shadows of night deepened, George, Sarah, Max, and young Emily huddled together in the living room, hearts pounding, adrenaline coursing through their veins. The terrifying encounter with the creature outside had ignited a fire of determination within them. "We can't just sit here and wait," George said, his voice steady despite the fear. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." Emily, still trembling, nodded. "I can help. I know the woods well. Maybe I can show you where I saw it." "Are you sure, Emily?" Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. "Yes," the girl replied firmly. "I want to help." Max, sensing the tension, stood tall, his golden fur glistening in the dim light. He let out a low growl, ready to protect his family. "Okay," George said, taking a deep breath. "We'll need a plan. First, we should arm ourselves with flashlights and anything else we can find." The group quickly gathered flashlights, a sturdy walking stick, and a few other supplies. George's heart raced as he looked at the determined faces of Sarah, Emily, and Max. They were a family now, united by a bond forged in adversity, ready to confront the darkness together. As they stepped outside, the world felt different. The night air was thick with tension, and the sounds of the forest buzzed with an eerie energy. Emily led the way, her small form illuminated by George's flashlight. Max stayed close to her side, guiding her through the shadows with his unwavering loyalty. "Just a little further," Emily urged, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered. "I saw it near the old oak tree." As they ventured deeper into the woods, George's thoughts raced. What had Tom meant when he said they couldn't run from their past? What if this creature was a manifestation of their fears, a reminder of the pain they had endured? "Stay close together," George instructed, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. When they finally reached the old oak tree, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew still, and an unnatural silence enveloped them. Emily pointed toward a clearing, her eyes wide with fear. "It was there," she whispered, trembling. Suddenly, a rustling noise broke the silence, and a pair of glowing eyes emerged from the darkness. George's heart raced as he felt the ground beneath him shift with the weight of the unknown. "Max!" George shouted, stepping in front of Emily and Sarah. The dog growled low and fierce, ready to defend his family against whatever threat loomed before them. As the figures stepped into the light, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. It was a large wolf, but its eyes held an intelligence that was almost human. The creature looked both majestic and terrifying, its fur shimmering under the moonlight. "Wait," George said, holding up a hand. "It's not attacking." The wolf stood still, observing them with curious eyes. It seemed to be assessing the situation, as if it understood the gravity of the moment. "Why is it just watching us?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "It's possible it's been watching over the woods," George speculated. "Maybe it's a guardian of sorts." Emily stepped closer, her fear slowly fading. "I think it wants to help us," she said softly. As if sensing her words, the wolf took a step forward, its gaze locked onto Max. The golden retriever, sensing an unexpected connection, relaxed slightly, his growl fading into a curious whine. "Max, go on," George encouraged, his heart swelling with hope. Max approached the wolf cautiously, their eyes meeting, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The wolf lowered its head, acknowledging Max's bravery. Suddenly, the wolf turned and began to walk deeper into the woods, looking back as if inviting them to follow. "Should we?" Sarah asked, glancing at George. "We have to," George replied, determination etched on his face. "This could lead us to the answers we need." They followed the wolf, hearts pounding with both excitement and fear. As they moved deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to shift. The once oppressive darkness now felt alive with energy, as if the very trees were whispering secrets. Finally, they reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an ancient stone structure, covered in vines and moss, its presence both haunting and beautiful. "What is this place?" Emily asked, all mingling with trepidation. "I think it's a place of power," George replied, feeling an unexplainable pull toward the stones. "It's where the past and present collide." As they stepped closer, the wolf sat at the edge of the clearing, watching over them with fierce loyalty. "Do you feel that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes," George replied, feeling the energy of the place pulse around them. "It's like the forest is alive." In that moment, the shadows began to swirl, and the air thickened with memories long forgotten. Visions of the camping trip flooded George's mind. The laughter, the bond he shared with Max, but also the fear and pain of their separation. "George," Sarah said softly, "I think we're meant to confront our fears here." Taking a deep breath, George stepped forward, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on him. Tom was right. We can't run from our past. We have to face it. As if in response, the wolf let out a low, melodic howl that echoed through the clearing. The sound resonated deep within George's heart, awakening a sense of courage he didn't know he possessed. "Max, let's show them what we're made of," George said, his voice steady. Max barked in agreement, standing tall beside him. Together, they faced the shadows, ready to confront the darkness that had haunted them for so long. As they stood united, the shadows began to dissolve, revealing a path illuminated by light. It led them toward understanding, closure, and healing. "Together, we can break the cycle," Sarah said, her voice filled with newfound strength. They stepped forward into the light, and with each step, the burden of their past began to lift. The memories that once haunted them transformed into lessons of resilience and love. As they emerged from the shadows, the wolf stood watch, a guardian of their journey, ensuring that they would never face the darkness alone again. In that moment, George realized that love, friendship, and family could conquer even the most formidable fears. They had faced the unknown and emerged stronger, more united than ever. As they made their way back home, George looked at Sarah and Emily, knowing they had begun to mend their fractured bonds. With Max by his side, he felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. If this story is touching your heart, make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. As they stepped into the warm embrace of their home, a sense of hope filled the air. They had faced the darkness together, and now they would walk into the light, forever changed by the journey they had taken. The bond between George and Max had only grown stronger, a testament to the power of love that transcends all obstacles. And as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over Maplewood, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united by an unbreakable bond that would guide them through the darkest of nights.